8:07. A government-regulated service which was meant to allow people to block cold callers is being ignored by some telemarketing companies.
The BBC's Panorama found that despite thousands of complaints being lodged each month with the Information Commissioner's Office, which has the power to enforce the rules, they've yet to impose any fines.
Tony Clark has both an ex-directory phone number and he's signed up to the Telephone Preference Service, a scheme that's supposed to prevent UK-based companies from making unwanted cold calls. Yet he's still getting up to 5 of them a day. He found one firm was especially persistent.
I'd like to know how they know about me, how they got my details.
Panorama went undercover to find out.
My name's I'm calling from the Industrial Hearing Clinic.
In fact, the company calling Tony and others like him is called Central Claims Group, based just outside Manchester.
Okay. Why can't we say CCG?
There's my cold caller. We tell them like the company name and that sort of thing.
In a statement, Central Claims Group said it takes its legal and regulatory obligations very seriously and does not condone the lapses we filmed. They said they have informed all employees that introducing themselves as anything other than Central Claims Group will, if proved, be regarded as gross misconduct, warranting summary dismissal. But what of the scheme that's supposed to block cold callers? The Direct Marketing Association runs the scheme, but enforcement is the job of the Information Commissioner's Office, and they haven't imposed any fines in the last 18 months.
At the moment, we definitely are trying to take action against these individuals. We've only had the power to issue a fine since the end of January, so it's early days yet. The other thing I have to say is there is a lot of money to be made in this particular sphere.
So for now, companies across the country are getting away with breaking the rules. Declan Lawn, BBC News.
Well, you saw him there in that report, and joining us now, Simon Entwisle, the Director of Operations at the Information Commissioner's Office. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
How come you're not fining people who are doing this?
Well, we've not had the power to fine people for very long. And what we are doing, though, we're actively investigating organisations, and it may very well lead to fines in the not too distant future. I can't obviously go into details of current investigations, but what I can tell you is these investigations are not simple. They are complicated investigations. And the last thing the Information Commissioner would want to do would be to go along the route of issuing a fine and then find it was being challenged by the organisation and us losing out. So we want to get this right when we issue our first fines. Might be useful to just point out that when we got this power for data protection breaches, again, it was a slow start for the Information Commissioner, but now we've issued over £2 million in fines in that area, £800,000 last year, something that will be launched in our annual report later on this week.
Is part of the problem with you not yet being able to fine anyone in connection with this, is that because not enough people are coming forward with information? Do you not have enough evidence? I mean, I'm not quite sure, because if you have people saying it's happening, is it that you don't have the weight of evidence against people, or are the companies saying, no, it wasn't us? Where's the problem lie?
The weight of evidence is a very important point. We've recently, since March, introduced a very simple mechanism for people to report to us instances of where they're being called despite having their number registered with a telephone preference service. Now, so far, we've had over 12,000 people register their concerns on that service. That now enables us to build up this bigger picture of the numbers and the organisations that are calling people. Now, because the fines require there to be significant damage, we can't just fine someone for making one cold call. What we've got to do is we've got to track a significant number of calls back to a particular organisation and then use that evidence to support a fine.
So what's the tipping point?
At the moment, we've got we need probably in the hundreds of calls in order to lead to a monetary penalty. At the moment, we've got that in a couple of cases and we're actively pursuing it.
So, if a company simply cold calls and that person's number is registered with the telephone preference service and they have specifically said they don't want calls, and they get in touch with you and say, what on earth is going on? I'm getting calls X number of times a day. what would you then do? Would you contact the company and tell them to stop? Would you add that information to your file and hope that 99 other callers come through? What happens?
Well, generally speaking, it depends really. What we would do is, if it was the first time that had happened, we would add it to our list and we'd carry on getting the intelligence.
Do you also contact the company?
We do. We're in touch with the worst offenders. We're not just in touch with them to sort of threaten them to stop doing this, because a lot of them use the excuse that you've given you consent, they've obtained consent to allow them to call you, which is something that bypasses the telephone preference service.
Okay, what counts as consent?
Well, this is where we're challenging the organisations to tell us what their procedures are for making certain that they actually have got consent and they're not just paying lip service to this provision.
Okay, so hang on. So a company can say, yes, we've called Mr. Smith 10 times today, and you can say yes, and he's registered in the telephone preference service and he's complained to us, and they'll say yes, but at some stage he gave consent, and that bypasses the whole thing.
If that consent was genuinely given, it would. But we don't believe that they are using genuine consent in this area. We think that they're paying lip service to that, and that may be something that's demonstrated on the Panorama programme tonight.
When you say paying lip service, do you mean that they're making it up?
I mean that what they're doing is not really checking the number. They may buy a list of telephone numbers, and the list may be sold on the basis that these are numbers of people who've given consent. But we don't believe that these organisations are actually checking back to make sure that there has been genuine consent given. And what we can do in those circumstances is we can issue an enforcement notice against this company that's making the calls to say you must put in place proper mechanisms for checking that you've received consent. And if they breach that enforcement notice, it then becomes a criminal matter. Now, we're actively pursuing the organisations who are on our sort of top 20 hit list of organisations who we receive the most calls about at the moment. Now, I'm sorry we haven't issued any enforcement notices in the last couple of months, but you can expect those to happen in the not too distant future, along with a monetary penalty.
All right, I'm afraid that's where we have to leave it, but Simon Entwisle, thanks very much indeed,
Thanks
Director of
for your time.
Operations at Information Commissioner's Office.
Thank you.
18